So it's 2 o'clock. Hello, everyone. I'm joined today by my well, actually, I should introduce myself first, shouldn't I? That would be easiest. My name is Matt. I look after our research work here at UniAdmissions, which in practice means that it's my job to make sure that everything we suggest to you in our consultations, everything we print in our books, everything we do is informed by evidence, and so everything we're going to go on to recommend in this presentation, that it really works. I'm joined today by my colleague Dylan. Dylan, if you can introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, sure. So hello, everyone. My name is Dylan. I'm one of the senior admissions consultants at UniAdmissions. So what that means is I really spend my days speaking to parents and students about the applications for all Oxbridge applications. And so I've spoken and dealt with hundreds of students and parents with their applications into Oxbridge. So yes, that's me.
Fab. We're going to be talking today about the process of applying to study PPE. That's personal protective equipment. No, that's politics, philosophy, and economics, which is a particularly prestigious subject at Oxford, and talk about studying economics more broadly at Oxford and Cambridge. Whereas next week we're going to be talking, as we do every month, about becoming a doctor. I probably am never going to become a doctor. Consequently, I'm going to be joined by my colleague and boss, Rohan, who is himself a doctor for that one, so we have someone with a little bit more expertise. If I were a doctor, I'd probably be busy down at the hospital right now rather than here. We're going to talk about a few sort of topics today. We're going to examine why it is that you might want to study PPE or economics if you're still just thinking about what subject you're going to go for. Discuss what you're going to need to do to secure that place, and what we can do to help once you've come to the conclusion that it's what you want to do. So why might you want to do PPE? The first thing to say is that alongside doing an MBA, PPE is the degree that is associated with people who are at the very top of government. You've got a lot of people who want to be Prime Minister studying PPE, a lot of people who go on to become journalists, senior civil servants. These are really popular courses for people who want to go on and do that later in life. Along with economics and management, also a course at Oxford. These are the two most competitive courses at Oxford, and they're just incredibly prestigious. PPE really is the top degree after medicine in terms of sort of impressing people. So if you want to impress people and you want to be Prime Minister, then this is quite possibly the course for you. And if you don't want to be Prime Minister, one of the things that's positive about it is it earns you an awful lot of money. Of the degrees you can pick, economics is the one that pays the most outside of medicine or dentistry. And as you can see there, my mistake of studying English has cost me thousands of pounds. I shouldn't have done that. I should have gone for economics, which I did consider at one time, but we all make mistakes. So that's the kind of both the prestige and the cash angles on the advantages of applying for PPE. So if you've decided you are going to apply for it, what does it take to get in is the big question. So everything I'm about to suggest is drawn from the Oxford PPE admissions procedures, which is a document that they've been kind enough to release publicly to us, so that we can really see how this process works in practice. And I believe that brings us on to the pie chart, Dylan, which is one of your specialities.
Yes, indeed. So When I speak to parents and students on the phone, one question that comes up quite a lot is, what am I going to have to do during my admission year or at my admission cycle? So in other words, what is Cambridge or Oxford actually looking for, and how are they going to assess you? And the reason why it's important for you to know this is so that you know how to dedicate your time, and just so that you have a clear understanding of how important each part is. And so, we've found that this pie chart is a good way to demonstrate this. So, when I speak to students and parents, one thing that comes off in the beginning is that there's a conception that academics and personal statement play the biggest parts. And although they do, what I would say is this is a more accurate representation of how Oxford and Cambridge are going to be looking at your admissions, or looking at you as a student and judging it against others to decide who actually gets the place. Okay, so we can see in the blue it's exam grades, which generally would constitute roughly about 30% of your application. Okay, and so keep that in the back of your mind, so that although your exam grades are a qualifier, certainly for Cambridge and Oxford, as a whole, it makes up 30% of your admissions cycle. Okay, you can see that your admissions tests, so in the case of PPE for Oxford, you write the TSA, and the case for Cambridge for economics, you write the ECA. And these are admissions tests, which also constitute 30% of your application, so just as important. Now, when you combine it with your interviews, which is another 30%, you can actually see now that combined interviews and admissions test, that the judgment of your application is predominantly done outside of school. So in other words, your whole application or your whole admission cycle, 70% of it is actually outside of your grades or outside of your GCSEs and predicted A levels. Okay, the yellow, which is everything else, would be your personal statement, your school references, and anything else that that would fall onto the application. Okay, but well, yeah, this is a good way for you to know how important each part is, and so how you can plan the forthcoming years and your preparation accordingly if you do truly want to get into Cambridge or Oxford.
Fab. Thanks, Dylan. This pie chart has changed subtly from last year because of the situation with centre assessed grades for GCSEs and now A levels for 2 years running. Our expectation is that there's going to be more emphasis placed on these admissions test scores and slightly less on exam grades. So if you're thinking of applying particularly to Oxford and your GCSEs aren't quite as stellar as they might have been, you'll still have a good chance if you're able to do really well on that test. The reason for this is, if we stay with PPE for a moment, this is the under the source for our pie chart. This is the breakdown of how shortlisting decisions are made at Oxford for PPE. And what you can see here is that really the most important thing is that pre-interview test, and that you can get yourself all the way up to almost certainly shortlist simply by doing really well on the test. So if you find yourself in the top 15, 20% of applicants in terms of test score, you're almost certain to get that interview. And so unless you've done something really weird in your reference or your personal statement, you're going to be really home clear on that. From memory, looking at the test scores for the top 10, 15% of students, I think you will get each year maybe 2 or 3 who aren't offered interviews. And then you'll see that over 50% of those scoring in the top range of the test will be offered places as well. So we mentioned the admissions test there, the TSA. So the TSA is made up of 25 critical thinking and 25 problem solving multiple choice questions. There tend to be 5 possible answers for each question. Critical thinking here is a little bit of a way of saying sort of verbal reasoning, and problem solving kind of way of saying numerical reasoning. So if you're trying to think about what kind of question that would be. You then have an essay. You get 4 possible questions. You only get half an hour to put together the essay. The scores from the essay tend to vary a lot less than the scores from the first part of the test. And so in general, I would say that the essay is less important. But again, if you write a terrible essay, that's not going to do you any favors. And if you're thinking of applying to Cambridge rather than Oxford, then they have their own very similar approach, test called the ECAA, the ECAA. So I'm struggling with the lighting all of a sudden. The TSA is also used at UCL for their courses in social and political studies. They have two. One is European. And there, I believe they don't bother with the essay portion. Again, I'd have to double check that, but yeah, the TSA is used for UCL as well. Now, the biggest pattern we see with applicants when we're doing our research is the extent to which applicants underrate the importance of maths. This is odd because if you've ever opened an economics textbook or read an economics paper, you'll know that it is mostly maths. But we see a huge number of students who come to us who aren't doing A-level maths, who got a B in maths at GCSE and who still want to study PPE. And realistically, that isn't going to happen. The average maths grade at GCSE for someone who gets into studying economics is going to be in that, it's going to be a 9 almost all of the time, very occasionally an 8. And if you look at the choices made by offer holders, the chance of you getting in tick up by 5 to 6% for taking maths and for taking further maths. And the thing to bear in mind here is if you haven't done this maths, you're going to have to do it once you get to the university anyway to study the economics portion of the course. So it's hugely important to make sure that you're doing really well in maths, and we would strongly recommend anyone we work with to be making sure they do further maths, simply because of the strength of that correlation, where people taking further maths are almost twice as likely to get in as people, applicants in general. So if you've done well in the test, you'll be fortunate enough to be invited for an interview. What are they going to want from you in the interview? First of all, they're going to want to see that you have a sense of application here being a concentration, drive, passion, that the kind of problems and questions they put in front of you are questions that you're really interested in answering, something that you can show passion and enthusiasm for. Along with that passion, you need to be showing really exceptional reasoning skills, that you're able to lay out an argument throughout the course of the interview, come up with intelligent points, and present yourself in a way that shows your skills, but also that if you find yourself stuck going down a blind alley, coming up with a kind of poor quality argument, that you're able to stop yourself, abandon it, and go, actually, based on this new information, I've changed my mind. This is one of the areas we find students who haven't really prepared find the most difficult, as they will think that the application in these 3 criteria overrides the reasoning, that if you've got a point, you've got to stick to it, even if your argument is sort of crumbling under your feet. And all of this is part of communication. They're looking for really good communication skills for you to be able to articulate your ideas, to put all of the application, the passion, the reasoning ability, to be able to communicate all of that to the interviewer. Because if you can do it on the test, that's great. But if you can't explain it to another person, if you can't engage face-to-face, then that Oxford and Cambridge small group teaching system isn't going to be right for you. So I've pulled out a few sample interview questions. These are from last year, I believe. And this covers kind of the breadth of what you might be asking a PPE interviewer. Some of it will, of course, be politics, some philosophy, some economics. There are separate interviews on each of these components. So in the context of politics interview, you might find yourself discussing the health implications of smoking, understanding why smoking is still legal in the UK, trying to understand the political reasons for it, the importance of the tobacco industry, the lucrative quality of the taxes that are levied on cigarettes, understanding all of the different components that go into the kind of legal equilibrium we have at present. moving into a philosophy interview, and there's no expectation that you've studied philosophy in a kind of formal sense before applying. You might be asked a question about violent protest. That would be very topical at the moment, I suppose, or just broader questions about what areas of philosophy you're interested in. Again, these questions will be trying to tease out the linkages between philosophy and politics and economics, which are the point of the course if you're applying for PPE. And because it's economics, and this is the same for every one of these social science subjects, there's definitely going to be some graph and some data interpretation questions. And again, this is where students who haven't done enough maths, who haven't done further maths, can fall down, because they might be fantastic at the philosophy, but all of a sudden find the data side of things very difficult, and that can be a real problem for an application. We've already had a couple of questions in the chat on this next subject, so hopefully this will cover a little bit of that. Now, PPE is the most popular course in terms of reapplications at Oxford, and E&M comes into relatively close second. So what I mean by reapplication is if you applied in the year 2007 and you didn't get in, coming back in the year 2008 and applying again. And if that second time you get in, you start at the beginning of the year 2009. So there are around 135 reapplicants to PPE each year. It moves around a little bit, somewhere between 120 and 150. But these make up roughly 7% of all applicants. So something like one in 12 people who is applying to study PPE is doing so for the second or even the third time. And what's striking is that reapplicants get in at a rate of 21%, compared with just 12% for the first time. So you're getting pretty close to doubling your chances by going around the second time. We don't have specific data on serial reapplications, so people who apply a first and a second and a third time. But it is really striking for PPE the uplift that you get applying that second time. So I hope that helps there. Now Dylan's going to talk through a little bit of how we can help, because obviously our services extend further than this PowerPoint. So Dylan, if you can talk us through the programs that we're offering at the moment, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So we run a few programs, and it's worth saying here that you have to speak to myself or one of our the team. We have a few admissions consultants that will talk you through the application, just answer any questions that you might have, and just make sure that you are right fit for us, and that we can indeed help you. That's what I aim, and what the others certainly aim to do in our consultations. So after I go through the programs, what I would suggest is that you can book a consultation. If you had any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer any. I've got a headset fit for purpose. and so yes, to get onto any of the programs, or if you want to discuss your application in more detail, just book a consultation and we'll be in contact, okay? So with us, we've realized that if we go back to the pie chart that I was explaining early on, that your academics or the work that you're doing at school, really plays, a smaller part if we compare it to your application as a whole. So a large part of your application would require you to prepare, or at least if you are hopeful for Cambridge or Oxford, where it's so competitive, you want to prepare or get better scores than the others. And the better you do, or the more people you beat in the admission cycle, the higher your chances of getting that place in Oxford or Cambridge are. Okay. And so with this in mind, our support is broken down into different I like to call them pillars, should we say. However, the goal really is to make your admission application as best, appear as best as possible to Cambridge and Oxford. So in other words, we want to look at your personal statement, your admissions test, whether that be the TSA or the ECA, as well as your interviews. Now, the first way we'd support you with these three areas which if we go back to the pie chart is around 70% of your application. Maybe more now with what's been going on with grades and COVID and teachers and exams and so forth, right? So it might have a higher weighting. So the first way we would support you with all these areas is resources. Okay, so we have textbooks, you get ebooks, you get everything that you need to support you with each area of the application. So your personal statement, for the TSA or the ECA, you'll get guides, mock papers, work solutions, and past papers, and so forth. Content that we've written our own, ourselves, should I say. And this is just so that you have everything that you need in terms of resources for your admission cycle. So we even go as far as even having resources on college selection. So within Cambridge and Oxford, you want to select your house. As Ryan says, it's, if you're a Harry Potter fan, sort of like Hogwarts, your houses. But you're going to have to choose a college, and so we'd give you support on that through resources. We also give you access to our prep portal, which is an online version, and it's a really great place for you to sort of practice and revise for your admissions tests, your personal statements, and so forth. Really over here, there's 3 sections within it. The first one is where you'll be learning. So essentially the first part, if we think about an admissions test, is learning the content. And so the first part, this video might have been NSAA or the MAT. This is going through the first part, which is learning, making sure you understand the content. Obviously, maths being important for economics, you're going to want to know the theory behind it. Okay, you'll then need to revise what you've learned via questions, and this is done nicely within the learning platform, where you can have a whole set of questions, and you can just practice your theory, okay, that you've learned in the previous section. The video on screen that's showing right now is just sort of demonstrating the questions you can go through. And then right now, after you've practiced the theory, you've revised some questions. Now you actually want to see how you do in a mock paper or a simulated environment. And so how we do that is in the simulate part of the prep portal, where it'll be timed. And I think, speaking to applicants, this is the biggest challenge, is actually knowing the content, but then being able to do it in the right amount of time is a whole nother thing. And so this is a really good way for you to practice that.
Thanks, Dylan. Dylan's done particularly well there with the video, which is at a particularly challenging speed today. So on top of this preparation for the tests, we also make a really big emphasis on making sure that students are prepared for the interview. Now, as we talked about earlier, the interview is all about being able to engage with these complex university level topics at the right kind of standard, and to be able to communicate that clearly to the interviewer. Now, this isn't something that you can easily pick up in the space of a week or two. This takes, we've found, really months of preparation to really build those skills. And the way we do this for our students is through a process we call Enrichment. So every Sunday, our students will meet together for a seminar where they'll be working with current students and recent graduates of the course they're planning to study, looking at university level topics, really deepening their understanding and practicing those kinds of communication discussion skills that are going to be tested on in the interview. So we've got a brief example here that I'm going to show you, taken from one of our medicine enrichment seminars that'll give you a sense of how they work.
So the aims of these whole enrichments are supposed to be 24. It's supposed to guide you throughout your application with your wider reading.
Ooh, are we having problems with the video there, Dylan?
Yeah, it seems like it's
That's frustrating.
Everyone knows that you have to do wider reading to support your medical application, to sort of demonstrate that you have an insight into medicine. But the other thing that these enrichment supervisions will do is supposed to help you increase your confidence in discussing these different aspects of your wider reading, because that's what you're going to be asked to do at interview. So I think the best place to start building up the confidence is probably on here and talking in this group. And hopefully throughout all of the wider reading that we'll be doing with you, you'll be feeling a bit more prepared for life as a medical student and as a doctor as well.
There you go. I'm sorry that was so choppy. I'll have to investigate why that happened.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's worth on the enrichment seminars. I find these are really good for the interviews, like Matt was saying. And you know, for I know I showed a medicine one there, but if you were to apply for Cambridge for economics, we would put you on in our economics stream, okay, where we would discuss you know, uni grade, essentially topics that are outside of your A-level syllabus, so that when you get to interview, you're really able to demonstrate that you have an interest in your subject because you've been attending these seminars and have this in-depth knowledge, and you've been able to discuss it, and then you'll be able to actually say it out loud through conversation, and have a much deeper content base in order to explain your answers. So it works really well. And if you were to join our PPE, you would join our humanities in enrichment seminars.
Fab. Thanks, Dylan. So we also provide day courses, so the opportunity for students to spend a whole day or a whole weekend working together directly with in groups and with tutors. And this is particularly helpful in the run-up to interviews, where we're able to provide mock interviews for everyone, with students who've recently been through this process themselves, with graduates, with tutors who have great track records with us and experience, and to give them, give you the chance to really achieve your potential by working in a kind of intensive way once you get to the most important part of the application process in the autumn. And of course, all of this is supplemented by one-to-one tuition. So we're very selective with the tutors that we recruit. We always make sure that you're working with a current student or a recent graduate in your subject, someone who's done really well in the admissions test, who understands the interview process, and that you're working closely with them so that you can really target your weaknesses, understand your motivation as an applicant, and really shape your application based on their expertise. And as I mentioned a moment ago, we're fortunate enough to be able to provide mock interviews with a whole panel of subject specialists, in addition to your lead tutor, so that you can be, you know, getting into that interview in November or December next year, and you'll have done this 8-9 times before, and it won't feel as scary as it would be if you had done it once with someone from your school. Now, obviously, this is an awful lot of stuff, and so we do make sure that all of our parents are provided with reports after each session. So here's an example of a lesson report. This is the kind of detail you can expect, and this will pop up as a PDF in your emails as a parent after each session, so you know what your son or daughter is working on. You're able to support them and understand what they're up to. As I know from experience what teenagers are like when it comes to communicating. This is much greater detail than the response of something like, "Oh, fine," which I expect I would have offered if I'd been asked by my parents what I've been up to. And the good news is that all of this works. We have a success rate that we're really proud of. We get around 63% of our students in. This was for last year. I haven't quite finished running the numbers for this last cycle. And that's in the range of 3 times the success at the national level. Dylan, can you talk a little bit more about this, because I know this is something that comes up in almost every call that you have with prospective students that we speak to.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, obviously, when I'm speaking to applicants, like I say, a lot of the time, what I say to them is that really it's a competition for those places. there's only a few, and especially for Cambridge and well, PPE and economics, you saw from the graph earlier on that there's a lot of incentive for people to join these courses, to go on these programs, especially to Oxford and to Cambridge. It's prestigious, you get paid more. And so what we found is that we prepare our students through a continuous and gradual process throughout the year. So starting from essentially now, if you were to start with us, we would support you throughout the year until you complete your interviews. And we find that by doing this, it sort of sets our applicants apart from the others who maybe might only prepare for the admissions test a month before or during the summer, or whatever studying technique that they may have. So, we found that, compounded with the fact that we, prepare on the parts of the application that matter over a longer time frame, but also because, we have a great team and, we have research like Matt and obviously experience of getting people into Cambridge with the tutors who themselves have been through the process. Only naturally, if we're to compare it to someone who maybe didn't go through that or put that same level of preparation into it, it makes sense as to why our success rate is higher. And that shows from when Matt did the numbers from, I believe this is from 2019, Matt, right?
Yeah, so we're just finishing crunching through our 2020 numbers. As it would be, as you imagine, the students who get in are all too keen to phone up and let us know, but the students who don't tend to be a little bit slower to respond, so it takes a little time to get hold of all of the information.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah.
As Dylan mentioned, we're able to achieve these results, which, as you can see, in terms of Oxford, ahead of even the schools that send the most students to Oxford and Cambridge. Because as Dylan says, it's simply a case of the amount of extra time, the effort, the work we put into it. The Perth school, which I know was in the news this week, was able to get, I think, something of the order of 20 students in this year, but they have the great advantage of having a 9-strong UCAS team. And while we're slightly more than 9, we also do slightly better. So we also save a little bit of money by not having any sports facilities. So I think we're also better value for money as well. Now, we don't want to, first of all, intimidate anyone with all of this talk of tests and grades that we put a lot of emphasis on so far. For us, what we're really looking for is students who have the right attitude. It's much more important to us that they are passionate, that they are committed, that they're willing to work with us enthusiastically. If they come to us with slightly lower grades, but they really want it, that's far more important than if they have slightly higher grades, but they can't really be bothered. Students who are cocky and arrogant, they tend not to get in anyway, but we also find they don't tend to enjoy working with us. We don't tend to enjoy working with them. And so that doesn't tend to be a successful approach. And so if we're choosing between two students, it's always going to be a case of us choosing attitude over ability. And to make sure that this works out, we do offer a 2-week trial. This means that if you sign up for any of our programs, you can get a full refund if after the first 2 weeks it's not for you. And this is just to make sure that we have a really good match between the parent and the student and the program, that you're doing the right level of work, that you understand the commitment and time we're hoping to see from you. And we don't have unhappy students and unhappy parents working with us, because that doesn't tend to be fun for anyone. The good news is that not only do we have those impressive figures we mentioned earlier on, but people say nice things about us on Trustpilot. I'm not going to leave these up for so long that you can read them, I'm afraid, but please do visit Trustpilot. If you've enjoyed this webinar, please let us know there. And you can read a few testimonials from students and parents who've worked with us with results that they can be proud of. So that brings us to the Q&A section. I'm just going to leave running in the background this little animation that should show you how to book a consultation. So if you feel you've had too much of my voice and not enough of Dylan's, you can book that consultation, get him all to yourself, which is rather enviable. But as we're into the Q&A now, I'm going to introduce our third mystery panelist. Jake, can you tell us who you are and why are you here?
Hi, I'm Jake. I graduated in PPE from Oxford a year, 18 months ago now, I suppose. So I've been tutoring with UniAdmissions for the past kind of two cycles. Had a lot of kind of different students. Got a lot of kind of good results. A lot of good memories there as well. So hopefully I can give a bit of a perspective from a kind of tutor and from a student point of view as well as to exactly what's kind of important and what's being looked for in the process.
Fab, thanks Jake. So please drop any questions you might have into the Q&A panel and we will try to go through them. So yeah, we'll kick off those. So Lahari asks, if I took further maths at GCSE and got an 8 and got a 9 in maths GCSE, but only do maths A-level now, will that impact my chance of getting into Oxford for economics and management? So Jake, you've been there. I'm sure you knew some of the economics and managers. Had they all done further maths, or was there kind of a mix? Because our stats show that doing further maths helps, but I'm sure that your lived experience is just as helpful.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously the economics content in E&M is the same as PPE, so there's a big overlap there, and obviously I know all the E&M as well. I'd say a kind of good proportion had done further maths, but by no means all. I think one of the things that they look at, especially in admissions, they know that not every school necessarily offers further maths. It doesn't always work with kind of timetable constraints and things like that. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily kind of completely vital. I think it's much more that kind of mathematical ability. And I think within economics as well, it's the being able to use maths as a tool rather than necessarily use it in a kind of really formulaic or pure way. So I think it's a bit different for economics than it would be for say, straight maths. So I think it gives you an advantage because it allows you to practice maths a bit more, but I don't think it's by any means a necessary prerequisite. And I know plenty of people who've done well in economics without having further maths.
There you go. I'd also emphasize here, this is something I bring up when we do these about medicine. Students will come to us and go, I want to study medicine, but I haven't done a biology A-level. And we ask, well, why haven't you done a biology A-level? And they go, well, I don't like biology. And we say to them, the bad news is there's going to be a lot of biology if you study medicine. So while you may have escaped it for now, you are going to have to do it later. So this doesn't really make sense, your strategy. And similarly, if you don't like maths, but you do want to study economics, the bad news is you are going to have to study maths. And so if you, while there isn't necessarily any major downside, as Jake says, to not studying further maths, the bad news is you are going to have to do it eventually. So there is ultimately no escape from the numbers, I'm afraid. Although I suppose at further maths level, they've probably taken all the numbers out, haven't they? It's all letters at that point. Shows what I know. I didn't do maths at A level, which was a mistake and something I regret. So we've had a couple of questions from Emily and from Saho about reapplying to Oxford for PPE specifically. So we mentioned earlier in the presentation that our research shows that there is a meaningful increase in the chance of getting in the second time round for PPE. Going from something of the order of 12% up to something in the low 20s. But obviously it's still a very competitive course. Jake, do you know many people who were reapplicants, or is it a little bit of a taboo thing to talk about once you're there?
No, so I mean, at my college, there were nine of us that did PPE in my year. And of those 9, 2 of them were reapplicants. So one of them was UK based and had applied first time, hadn't got in, and then had kind of gone for it again. And one of them was a guy from France who'd applied, I think, a bit younger than everyone else and then reapplied. So kind of 2 slightly different circumstances. And there are a couple of other people who are in your other colleges who I just happen to know had been kind of reapplied and had got in, so a year older. I don't think it's really, it's not necessarily taboo. I don't think there's a particularly big difference. There are plenty of people who kind of have taken gap years as well. So even if there aren't reapplicants, there are people who are kind of have the same amount of experience or kind of a year later. So I don't think there's really a significant problem there. So I tutored a few people this year as well who were reapplicants and got in the second time around. I think the kind of thing that shines through is that as a reapplicant, you just have a bit more you can be a bit calmer. It's a bit less of a novel experience, and a bit easier, therefore, to show exactly what you're about and exactly what skills you have, rather than being kind of bowed or overawed by the kind of process itself. So I think there are kind of definitely things you can take there. I think the main thing though is doing it differently. I think if you've done it once and it didn't work, doing it again and try and do it exactly the same way isn't necessarily the kind of optimal strategy. Whereas obviously changing, being able to kind of look at your experience before, use the feedback that you were given, and in order to evolve and to make an even more competitive application the second time.
Yeah, as Jake says, that extra year and that little bit of experience can be really valuable. Now, of course, the downside of reapplying is, particularly if you're thinking about doing it now, you are committing yourself to 9-10 months of work towards it, and obviously there's no guarantee that it's going to turn out differently the second time. But again, the really important thing is to really deepen your motivation. Take a look at that personal statement and think about how you can bring yourself on in terms of your intellectual development by in that extra time. Really work on that maths, absolutely nail that admissions test, all of those things. What you don't want to do is be doing the same thing a year later, because chances are you're going to get the same result. You want to be doing something different. We, as Jake says, we have a lot of experience working with reapplicants. We have this data that shows that there's a level of success to it. And we know that a lot of students will apply on their own or with their school, and then having realized how hard it is, will decide to come and work with us the second time round, and that tends to really pay off. I believe we had something of the order of 70% success with the reapplicants we worked with this year. And so we're really looking to build on that in coming cycles, because it's an area that seems to work really well. So I hope that answers your questions, Emily and Saho. It's, as I say, it's really all about making sure that extra year really shows you off to the best advantage. And I know, Emily, you've asked about state and private schools. This is a bit of a complicated one and is really interesting. When we speak to people at private schools, they say that it's easier to get in if you're at a state school, and when we speak to people at state schools, they say the same thing. So I think everyone is a little bit worried that it's getting harder to get in. I think simply this is the level of competition has gone up. It's substantially harder to get in than it was when I tried 14 years ago. And that's that's being felt by everyone, regardless of what kind of school they're at. But if you're the best applicant, really, it's not going to have an impact on your application. It's all about making sure that you're the best you can be, regardless of the school setting. So Liana has asked, is it worth doing four A levels? Dylan, I know that you speak with a lot of students who do are thinking about a fourth A level, right?
Yeah, so what we generally find, or what we say, is that it would be better if you did, it's a better result to have 3 A stars than 2 A stars, 2 A's. So take that into consideration, I would say, if you're taking a fourth subject. So I suppose it's down to you as a student, or as the fourth subject. Is it something that you're strong in and could improve or get an A star in relativity to other three? But maybe Jay can build on that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so I did 4 for one of the reasons that I did maths and further maths. So I think there are perhaps some situations in which, as a student, it's easier. The fourth, at least, isn't as much work as a full A level in a sense. So in my case, doing kind of maths and further maths is obviously work, but it was used and kind of built on the kind of maths knowledge, and therefore maybe stronger in that area as well. So I think there are perhaps some combinations that are not quite as bad as others in terms of workload. But yeah, I think, as we say, it's definitely a case of wanting to kind of show the maximum ability and get the maximum grades in 3 rather than doing 4 and sacrificing that. But I think, as I say, there are some combinations that work a little bit better than others.
Yeah, we certainly wouldn't recommend that anyone do, say, maths, chemistry, history, and French. As unfortunately, there'll be an awful lot of things with relatively small crossovers. I think there are a couple of bits of the periodic table that are sort of in French, but that's all that I can think of that would help there. So I hope that helps. Christina asks why it is that return applicants have a higher success rate. So in one sense, we don't know. We aren't able to get the kind of super granular information that would show us what it was that a student had done in 1 year and then changed in the second year, and that had sort of tipped them over the edge, because that kind of information would unfortunately be very much a violation of the people's privacy. But Jake, I'm sure you can speak to this. What did people who had reapplied that you knew do, and what would you recommend? Why do you think this happens?
I mean, I think there are probably 2 or 3 things. I think probably one of the first things is that people who did it the first time and really, really hated it probably don't want to do it a second time. So you have a little bit of kind of natural filtering. I think there are other things though that contribute a lot as well. I think an extra year makes a big difference when you're kind of 18 to 19, right? It's a lot more kind of experience, a lot more being able to kind of settle into and take kind of, especially the interviews, kind of at face value and have a more kind of thorough discussion rather than finding it intimidating or anything. I think as well, the admissions test can make a big difference. I think there are definitely people who do it the first time and either don't put enough kind of prior work into it or panic or whatever. And then going in the second time with a much clearer kind of idea of the types of things that they're going to come up against, and therefore able to prepare in a much better way. So I think that makes a big difference as well. Yeah, I think just extra time to read, extra time to engage with the subject is always helpful. And it's sometimes things that are difficult to do when you're in the middle of A-levels. And I mean, by no means impossible. I think there are some people that struggle with it more, and therefore if they have a little bit more time, say over a summer, over a few months before applying, then they're just able to give it that little bit extra, and it in the end pays off.
Yeah, the other thing to mention here is that obviously one of the reasons that people get offers but don't get in is that they will get that offer and then they will fail to perform quite to the level in their A-levels. That's less of a risk these days when the teachers get to decide what the grades are. But one of the advantages of reapplying is there's no doubt as to whether you're going to get that A star in the minds of the tutors, because you've already done it. And so if you've got that offer, you can jet off to Bolivia or wherever you're going to go on your gap year after Christmas with that offer safely in your pocket. Every few years, there's some discussion of moving to a purely post-results university application process. And one of the advantages of it, one of the advantages of being a reapplicant is that is in effect what you're doing. You get to show up with the grades, and so there's no doubt as to whether you can do it. So Arkna asks, and this is a technical question, I expect, hopefully Jake or Dylan, you're familiar with this. So for conditional offers, Arkna asks, if a student does further maths, does it count as a grade for the offer? So if they get A star in maths and further maths, but an A and a B in their other subjects, would they, with an A star A offer, do they get a place or not? So basically, can you use the further maths A level as a kind of backup to eliminate one of your less strong A levels?
So I think in my case, I think especially for humanities subjects, the answer is yes. I think there are some science subjects in which there are more, they might require particular grades in particular subjects, but as a PPist, that's less of my kind of direct experience. But I know in the case of humanities subjects where they don't specify, then that case would be absolutely fine.
There you go. So that fourth A level can provide a little bit of insurance. However, we do, as we say, we don't generally encourage people to do a fourth A level outside of this further maths instance. It's extra work, which can take away from your success in the other three. And you're just adding, you're adding an extra variable, and that adds a little bit of risk every time. Plus, ultimately, once you get to the university, that's really all that matters. No one has ever bothered to ask my A levels since I've been to university. So it isn't a huge loss if there's something that you're interested in doing, but don't end up picking up. So please keep the questions coming in. I've paid Jake to be here for another 40 minutes, so please do take advantage of him. Otherwise, I'm going to force him to have answer my questions. Lahari has brought forward the question about price. We always get the question about price. So Dylan, tell us about price.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I would say is if you wanted to because how we work is we don't take on every student or every applicant. It's key for us to make sure that, like Matt was saying, that the applicant or that you have the right attitude and also the right grades, but also based off of that conversation that we have off of you, we will then be able to know which program would best help you with your journey, or which program would most likely get you the offer that you want. The only way that I can make that recommendation is if I do actually have a conversation with you. And so if you wanted to find out pricing for your particular admissions process, do book a consultation. You can see it on the screen there. Myself or one of the team, one of the other admissions consultants, will walk through your application, answer any questions you might have. And then that will also, based off of which program is right for you, will give you pricing.
Fab. The other thing to add there is that we have a target of working with one student on a fee-free or reduced fee basis for every student we work with on a full fee basis in 2022. So that means if we're going to have, say, 300 students in 2022, we want 150 of them to be coming to us on a reduced fee basis. So if you're watching all of this and you're thinking this sounds great, but I can't afford it, if you can't afford it, probably we're not going to ask you to pay full whack anyway. So please do get in touch. It's hard to believe, but the biggest challenge we have with recruiting people for the reduced cost version is that people know. So please tell your friends, and if you're worried about cost, please get in touch, because it's highly unlikely that we're going to ask you to pay more than you can afford. Particularly if you can't afford very much, there's an excellent chance that if you're a good applicant, we're going to be looking at doing that for free or very close to free for you. Liana asks, do extracurriculars matter, sport and music? Jake, how good at the piano are you?
Awful. I think
violin. What? Rugby?
I did play rugby. Yeah, that's true. I played a bit of drums a while ago. But I think the big thing about Oxbridge is that extracurriculars, so kind of sport and music, don't count really at all in admissions. They obviously they aren't to your detriment, but they're not really looked at. So supercurriculars, so things that are more related to the curriculum, so demonstrate kind of a passion or an ability in your subject, might count. So for example, if you were involved in Model United Nations and you're applying for a politics course or something, or say like a maths Olympiad for maths or something like that. So something that's much more kind of closely tied to the curriculum, that obviously can count in your favour and can show the breadth and depth of your ability and passion. But kind of those straight extracurriculars, no, not really at all.
Yeah, this is a misconception we come across a lot from students, particularly students who are thinking about applying to the States as well. In the States, you can get into Harvard because you're good at fencing. Unfortunately, at Oxford, they do not care if you are good at fencing or not. And this is just a really big gap. The attitude Oxford and Cambridge take is that if you want to study maths, you should be good at maths. If you want to study English, you should be good at English. And if you want to be really good at the Duke of Edinburgh or at the piano, that's fine. But unless you're really good at the piano and you're coming to study music, ultimately they don't really care how good you are at reading maps or climbing mountains, because you won't be reading maps or climbing mountains once you get there. Obviously, when you do get there, you do find a lot of people do play the piano or climb the mountains or fence or play tennis. And that isn't because that helps them get in. That's simply because those kinds of outside interests tend to be correlated, but they are very much not causative at all. So if your parents have been forcing you to learn the piano all these years and they hope it'll get you in, unless you're going for music, I'm afraid it probably won't help. But on the bright side, you can play the piano now, which I can't, and sort of envy. If only my parents had been meaner. So Sarah Hales, and please do all keep your questions coming. As I say, I've paid for another 35 minutes of Jake. Don't let him get away without having to do any work for that last half. Or at the very least, keep us here until the rugby starts. I've got to keep myself busy somehow. Sarah Hales asks, what about students coming from a different curriculum such as IB or CBSE? How does this impact Oxbridge offers or the tutoring we offer? So the first part on offers is really easy, which is that Oxford and Cambridge both have a system for converting these offers. and it's up on the website, and it's fairly easy to use. So I'm going to pop it open now. I'm going to give you some examples, just to make things nice and easy. So you asked about the IB, Sarah. So the IB is, I think, probably the second or third most popular qualification for applicants. So for the IB, depending on the course, they generally want you to get 38, 39 or 40 points. I believe the IB is still out of 45. And for you to get 6s and 7s in your higher level subjects, depending on the course. So if you're applying to study maths, they're going to want you to get a 7 in maths, English a 7 in English, and so on and so forth. That's what you want to be achieving there. And they have this available for pretty much every qualification you can think of. This is really important for students who come from farther flung parts of the world who want to work with us, as it's quite often that the qualifications available in their home country aren't ones that Oxford or Cambridge see as being sufficient. Places that aren't any good are Argentina, Anguilla, Angola, Algeria, and that's just the A's. So it's really worth checking that resource. But you will not be the first person, Sarah, to apply with an IB or a CBSE or an EB or one of a range of different qualifications, and so that won't be any problem from their standpoint. But how does it impact the tutoring we offer? So the thing here is that the level of these things does vary a little bit from system to system. So for example, I know that the quality of chemistry teaching that's assessed in the European Baccalaureate is slightly lower than the standard that's assessed in the A-level. And so if you're in that position, then we would be making sure that your tutoring was making sure that you were up to the right standard for the interview and the admissions test. There's nothing worse than getting to the admissions test and discovering there's something on there that you haven't studied, and so we would make sure that didn't happen. So if you were coming from a more unusual exam system, then we'll be taking some time. In fact, I think this would probably be my job now I think of it, to get all of those specifications down, compare them with the specifications for the course, for the interview, for the tests, and to really understand how we could target the tutoring to make sure that you'd covered everything you needed to. Fab. So Archna asks, for A-level choices, do subjects other than maths matter for PPE? Jake, this is a good one for you because I'm sure you've met people with a whole range of different A-level choices.
Yes, I think maths is important for the economics component. You have to convince them that you kind of have the aptitude to deal with the quantitative nature of economics. Outside of that, I mean, something essay-based is, I mean, in some sense is preferable because when you get to politics and philosophy, you'll be writing essays, like there's no way around it. I mean, so in terms of kind of politics and philosophy, I mean, I'm kind of going out on a slight limb here. I feel you might be suggesting that in order to study PPE, you should have studied one of PP or E before. And I wouldn't feel too much pressure in that regard. Most PPEs haven't studied politics or philosophy, especially at A-level. Economics is a little bit more popular, but politics and philosophy isn't so popular. Obviously, it's about asking yourself the question, kind of why. So especially with politics, it can be seen as a little bit less of a rigorous A-level. So obviously, if you're not choosing it A-level because you hate politics, then PP might be a bit of a shock. But it might be the case that you could pick an alternative that you enjoy as much or is more rigorous A-level and prepares you well for PPE, where you can kind of develop and explore that passion in politics. So apart from kind of perhaps an essay-based subject, there's kind of really pretty free reign at A-level for PPE.
Fab. Thanks, Jake. This comes up a lot. We were talking about law last week for any of you who decide to spend your Saturdays doing this every week, which, well, I thought it was only me who had to do that. One of the things that came up there is whether you have to study law at A-level. Now, it's actually very unusual for people to study law at A-level. It's not a particularly well-regarded A-level, not all that many schools offer it. And for law especially, you will get people who have done pretty much everything, deciding they want to be lawyers. You know, the people who have come through from a kind of a STEM route, people who've come through from a social science route, people who are coming through with just English and history and can barely deal with fractions. You'll get a whole range of things. People applying for law, and it's very much the same sort of thing goes for PPE. It's actually really helpful, I understand, once you're sort of there, that people have this breadth of background. Unlike with, say, English, where you can be pretty confident people are going to have done English, history, and maybe a language. You tend to get much more diversity of interests with something like PPE, and that tends to lead to slightly more interesting conversations, at least in my experience. But I shouldn't further insult my colleagues from my days studying literature. They weren't all that boring. Fab. Liana asks, any advice on choosing a college at Oxbridge? I guess Jake, if you want to tell us your college choice story, I'll tell my college choice story, and then Dylan can finally tell us which one he likes the look of best.
Okay, so I chose Hertford on the basis that with my school we went to a few different colleges as like a kind of on a day trip almost. I like the look of Hertford. It was kind of relatively central. I met a few of the tutors who they were giving lectures and things, and I like the look of them. It seemed friendly. The location, it was kind of a 5-minute or less walk to lectures, and I quite like the idea of that. Apart from that, I think there's not all that much to pick between them. I mean, obviously, apart from Hertford is the best, but it can be quite hard to come up with really concrete reasons to distinguish between them. So I think it can be things like location and feel and things like that, as it was in my case.
Yeah, I tend to say to students that colleges are very much like football teams, in the sense that regardless of which one you pick, you will end up being convinced it is the best, and you could never possibly have chosen another one. And yet everyone feels the same. Which in a sense is suspicious, but that's human culture for you. So in my case, as it happens, I actually applied for Hertford as well. I got an offer there for my master's, but because Oxford had turned me down the first time when I applied in 2008, I was feeling vengeful, so I turned them down and went to Cambridge. And there I went to Emmanuel, and that was purely on the basis that they had a cheap bar and that they had ducks. And the ducks were very cute, and that was enough for me. So, as we say, there isn't all that much you need to worry about when it comes to college choice. It's a case of finding somewhere that you like the look of, and because of the way that students are redistributed through the pool system at both Oxford and Cambridge, which college you pick isn't going to have a major impact on whether you get in or not. A very small number of students do come to us convinced they can sort of game the system by applying to an unpopular college. And while I guess in a sense it sort of works, it's really not that. You should really be spending more time worrying about the admissions test and the interview than worrying about trying to sort of game out the strategy of it at that point, I would say. So Aparna has asked, can one apply for PPE without having studied A-level politics? Jake, this is back to you. I'm sorry, I forgot to ask you which college you like the look of best, Dylan. I'll come to that in a second.
So, in terms of politics, the answer, yes, definitely you can apply for PPE without having studied politics. So maths is recommended, but there are no strict requirements for what you have to have studied for PPE. Of the PPS that I kind of know with A-level choice, none of them have studied politics at A-level. I mean, there's no reason why if you did study politics at A-level, you wouldn't be able to study PPE. But just as it happens, none of the people I know did actually study politics for A-level.
Fab. Dylan's reminded me that he hasn't actually visited Oxford or Cambridge because of the lockdown since he moved here. So we're going to have to take you down there and get you to pick a favourite sometime soon, Dylan, once it's legal. That'll be a fun day out, actually. Rohan and I can try and convince you of the relative merits of our own colleges.
Yeah, which should be this year, given the announcements, hopefully.
Here's hoping. So maybe that'll be a trip out for us sometime in the summer, a little bit of a party. Sahu writes, I'm doing maths, further maths, economics and biology as my A-levels. Planning to apply to economics at Cambridge. I'm also planning to take Japanese A-level as Japanese is my native language. Do you think taking 5 A-levels will increase the chances of getting in? Jake, do you think it will help? I mean, I imagine that doing the Japanese A-level when you already speak Japanese is going to be quite easy. So I reckon that's definitely that should be an A-star already banked with any luck.
Yeah, I think there are some cases where they'll look at, because they obviously know what school you're applying from, where you're applying from, and they might discount. There is a potential for them to, I think, discount or count less an A-level in your native language. But I can't, off the top of my head, exactly remember what the process of them doing it, whether it's kind of centralized or whether it's just kind of a tutor by tutor kind of determination. But I mean, if it was easy, it's definitely not going to hurt.
No, I think in that instance, that's a good example of where it's helpful to get in touch with us when you have these really specific personal circumstances that we can dig into on the phone. Obviously, not everyone has the opportunity to go and do an A-level in their native language, and so if you've got the opportunity to get that really straightforward A-star, then I think that's a good idea. I'm going to have to investigate how difficult the Japanese A-level exam is now. But of course, now I realise, thinking about it, that I'm not going to be able to read the exam paper, am I? Because it'll be in Japanese. So, Lord knows. But that sounds rather fun. If nothing else, doing the exam in half the time you're supposed to might be quite entertaining. Fab. So we're out of questions at the moment. So please do chuck a couple back in. If we've answered all of your questions, then everyone gets to go home early, which isn't such a bad thing. But please do submit any questions you have now before we call a kind of premature end to things. Jake, is there anything that you were expecting us to ask that you haven't been asked yet, as a way of sort of vamping in the hope another question shows up?
I suppose kind of what you can do in terms of preparation. I think people are always asking, well, I really want to prepare, I want to kind of try hard and put a lot of effort in, but what can I actually do? I mean, obviously this kind of varies course by course, but I think getting started early, kind of having a real a roadmap, a game plan, as it were, to kind of set yourself up for September, October. So exploring reading, kind of as much kind of diversity in reading as you can, get a little bit away from the school curriculum. If there are lectures or kind of projects that you can get involved with, so obviously at the moment it's difficult to go to any public talks in person, but the benefit is that lots of them moved online, so you can kind of access things you wouldn't be able to access kind of physically anyway. Especially Oxford, I know, have a podcast series for several different degree courses, so you can see either kind of first year lectures or special guest lectures, and they can give you a little bit of a flavour of what the course is about. They can perhaps give you a jumping board to start to think about where you can explore and what you can get involved with in terms of your subject going forward as well. If there are things to do with school, so for example, for something like PPE, there are essay competitions in economics. So I know the FT does one, the Centre of Economic Institute does one as well. So they have, in say kind of March to May, normally a couple of different essay competitions. You can enter those. They kind of provide a little bit of backup for A-level because they kind of help practice and hone those skills. And also, if they end up going well, they're a good thing to add into personal statement. Say, I don't know, Model United Nations debating, things like that can just add in, give you a little bit of flavour as well. But obviously, if you come to kind of August, September, and you're thinking, well, I'd really love to have these things in my personal statement, by then it's very difficult to fit all these things in. So thinking about it with a bit of time to go is really helpful.
Fab, thanks very much. So those are some great resources. Jake, this one's Jake. Jake mentions. Aparna, we would encourage you to mention any of the ideas that you've come across through working with us in your personal statement. Obviously, we don't suggest that you tell the universities that you've been preparing with us, but we do very much recommend using the ideas that we bring out with you in your application. And I think we'll end things here with one final question. So Lahari asks, what supercurriculars would you recommend, Jake, for economics and management? What I was going to recommend is there is a free online course in economics available from Marginal Revolution University. So I'd recommend that, which is something I'm working on at the moment. And there are a couple of other really good sets of resources you can get hold of online, particularly for economics, as people try and sort of popularize the subject. So those are really useful. Jake, if you've got any others you can suggest?
I would say, so Yale, the kind of American university, have an online game theory kind of taped lecture series. It's like introductory game theory. That's quite interesting. So it builds up from the kind of maths, using the kind of basis of maths that you'll learn at A-level or equivalent. So it's quite accessible. It gives a nice kind of walkthrough or introduction to game theory, which is quite an interesting subject in of itself within economics. Obviously, that can then be used to support reading as well. There are a couple of other similar things from kind of Cambridge and Oxford, say podcast series or lectures to do with economics. As I say, essay competitions are quite good. So I know as I say, the FT, I think the Bank of England have one. I think there's a Cambridge College, I can't precisely remember which one, maybe Selwyn, who do an economics essay. So kind of entering a couple of those, being able to convert from, say, either having not studied economics or having studied something at A level, being able to convert it into slightly longer, slightly more academic and discursive essays can be helpful preparation, not only in the essay itself, and obviously if you do well, that's fantastic for the personal statement, but also it helps to solidify and clarify your thought going towards the interviews, which is obviously very helpful as well.
Fab. Well, that brings us to the end of the questions, and it's half time in the rugby, so this seems as convenient a time as any to slope off. Thank you very much, Dylan and Jake, for joining me this week. Next week, we're going to be talking about learning to become a doctor. So if you've decided that you don't want to be a prime minister, you want to be a doctor instead, please join us for that. Thanks very much, everyone. Have a lovely weekend, and goodbye.